Few could have imagined that a young hospice nurse would become the person whose words would completely shift how millions think about death and the afterlife. We're talking about Hadley Vlahos, an ordinary woman who wasn't afraid to look where most people turn away. She spoke out about what really happens in the final moments of life, and what she revealed is something science still can't explain. Very few hospice workers are willing to share what they've seen. But those who spend enough time with the dying know, at a certain point, something happens that defies logic. Patients start speaking with people who passed away years ago. A strange light fills the room. Many pass away smiling, almost as if someone has come to take them home. Hadley Vlahos is one of the few who had the courage to tell the truth. She's a licensed hospice nurse and the author of the best-selling book, The In-Between. Her heartfelt stories have reached millions online and opened the floodgates for others to share their own mysterious experiences. And every word she speaks is based on real events she witnessed with her own eyes. In her early years, Hadley Vlahos was a skeptic. She didn't come to medicine through spiritual searching or metaphysical curiosity. She became a nurse for a simple reason. She wanted to help people, to bring comfort to those in pain, to be useful. She never imagined her path would lead her to hospice. Hadley found her way into end-of-life care almost by accident. But once she arrived, something shifted. She began witnessing things she had no framework to explain. Moments that didn't fit into her previous view of the world. Patients who seemed to be losing touch with reality would suddenly grow calm and clear. They would start talking to visitors standing in the room, people only they could see. They would describe the scent of flowers, strong, sweet, unmistakable, even though there were no flowers anywhere nearby. Some knew, down to the minute, exactly when they would pass. They'd say things like, "I'll go tonight at 7. My brother is coming for me." And they did. At first, Hadley tried to explain these experiences away. Perhaps it was the medication, or oxygen loss. Maybe confusion. But when these coincidences began happening over and over across age, gender, background, belief, she began to realize this was not random. So she started talking about it. At first, just in short videos. She opened a TikTok account and began sharing stories, real moments from her time with patients, what she saw, what they said, what it felt like to sit next to someone who wasn't afraid to die anymore. What happened next shocked her. Millions of people responded. Her videos were viewed tens of millions of times. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest. People from around the world began sending her messages. "This happened to my mom. I thought I was the only one who saw this. Your story gave me peace." It was clear she had opened a door, a quiet one, a sacred one, and people were ready to walk through it. That's when Hadley decided to write a book, The In-Between, Unforgettable Encounters During Life's Final Moments. In it, she gathered some of the most touching, mystical, and transformative experiences she had witnessed during her time in hospice. The book became a bestseller, not because it offered explanations, but because it shared truth, raw, unfiltered, real. Hadley's mission is not to convince you of anything. She's not asking you to believe blindly. Her goal is to help people stop being afraid, to show that there is more to dying than most of us realize, and far more comfort than we ever imagined. Life after death, she says, isn't just a fantasy. It's something I've seen reflected in the eyes of those who were ready to go. Her stories are not theories. They're not metaphors. They're lived moments, moments she believes are trying to tell us something. We just haven't been listening. Until now. Some moments stay with you forever. For Hadley Vlahos, one such moment happened with a woman in her final days of life. The patient had been quiet and withdrawn, barely speaking, barely reacting. But the day before she passed, something changed. Her face lit up with a gentle, glowing smile. Her eyes sparkled with recognition. And then, in a whisper that sent chills down Hadley's spine, she said, "He's here. I've missed him so much." Hadley instinctively turned toward the corner of the room, expecting to see someone. But the space was empty. A few minutes later, the woman took her last breath. That was only one of many similar moments. Over the years, Hadley encountered countless patients who, just before death, would begin talking to people no one else could see. They would look toward the window or toward a corner of the room and carry on quiet conversations. Some would laugh, others would cry. but almost always, they seemed at peace. One man in his 70s looked Hadley straight in the eye and said with complete certainty, "My mom came. She's been standing by the window all morning. I'll be leaving today." And he did, at the exact time he had predicted. These weren't confused patients under heavy sedation. In most cases, they were lucid, calm, and fully present. Their words were coherent, their memories clear. They weren't hallucinating. They were describing something they genuinely believed was happening. Hadley noticed something else too, something harder to define. She recalled times when, just before a patient passed, the air in the room seemed to shift. It became warmer, thicker, not in a physical sense, but as if something else had entered the space, something unseen but unmistakably there. And while these feelings are difficult to prove or measure, Hadley knew what she was sensing: presence. Over and over, she watched people who had been afraid of dying suddenly become calm. They would stop fighting, they would smile at no one visible, and then they would let go. She emphasizes that no drug or medical explanation can fully account for these experiences. Not the clarity, not the peace, not the way people spoke with such confidence about who was in the room with them. Again and again, she saw that the dying are not alone. Many people assume death is a solitary process, but Hadley's experiences suggest something very different. She believes that, more often than not, someone comes. Whether it's a parent, a spouse, a child, or a friend who passed long ago, there's often a presence waiting at the threshold. And maybe, just maybe, that's why so many of her patients leave this world with a smile. Not because they're slipping away, but because they're being welcomed home. These are not dramatic Hollywood moments. They're quiet, personal, deeply human. And Hadley has been there to witness them, again and again. In her own words, "People think death is dark and lonely, but I've seen the opposite. I've seen light, warmth, and love. I've seen peace, and I've seen people leave this world knowing they weren't alone." There are stories that stay with you, not because they're loud or dramatic, but because they change something deep inside you. For Hadley Vlahos, many of these stories came quietly, in the stillness of a hospice room, in the final hours of life. One day, Hadley was sitting by the bedside of a man who had been unconscious for days. His breathing was shallow, his hands motionless. He hadn't spoken, moved, or opened his eyes. And then, just as she was checking his vitals, he suddenly opened his eyes, looked up with surprising clarity, and said, "They told me I did everything right." Then he closed his eyes again. He died shortly after. It was a sentence that stuck with her, not only because of what he said, but because of how calm and certain he seemed, even after days of silence. There was another man, a patient who had no visitors. No one had come to see him for weeks. Staff had been told not to expect family. But one day, the man looked at Hadley and said with quiet confidence, "My son is coming." He changed his mind. There were no calls, no messages. Yet just a few hours later, his son arrived at the hospice, unannounced, saying that something told him he needed to be there. He made it just in time to say goodbye. These weren't coincidences. Not to Hadley. These were moments that defied logic and yet felt completely real. She remembers a woman who hadn't spoken in days, her body growing weaker by the hour. Then suddenly, in the middle of the night, she began to softly sing a lullaby. Her voice was fragile but clear. "I hear them singing," she said afterward with a gentle smile. That was the last thing she ever said. Then there was a patient who had been in terrible pain, struggling to speak, barely able to move. Her suffering had been relentless, but about an hour before her death, she looked up and whispered, "I don't feel pain anymore. It's going away." And it did. She passed peacefully not long after. Hadley doesn't pretend to understand all of this. She doesn't claim to have scientific explanations, but she knows what she witnessed and how it made her feel. These moments aren't medical, they're sacred. They reveal something we don't often talk about, that at the very end of life, something else begins to take over. Something softer, kinder, more mysterious than anything medicine can explain. Hadley often reflects on how these experiences have shaped her, not only as a nurse, but as a person. She used to fear death. Now, after being at the side of so many people as they crossed that final threshold, she sees it differently. After those moments, she says, "I can't think of death as something dark or frightening anymore. I've seen too much peace, too much beauty, too many gentle goodbyes. She no longer wonders whether there's something beyond. Now she quietly believes there is. Hadley Vlahos doesn't ask people to believe. She doesn't preach, she doesn't push, but she does ask one thing: listen, not to her, but to those who are standing right at the edge between this life and whatever may come next. She's listened to them, over and over again, to the words whispered in final breaths, to the visions seen in quiet rooms, to the peace that settles just before a soul lets go. And because of that, she believes it's time the rest of us listen too. Her goal is simple but powerful: to give people hope, to ease the fear that surrounds death, to remind the living that letting go of someone doesn't mean the love ends, and to show that, in the end, death doesn't have to be scary. For Hadley, one of the most important changes we can make in modern hospice care is to treat the spiritual experience of dying with the same attention and care we give to physical comfort. She believes every hospice should include spiritual support as a fundamental part of care, not as an optional add-on, but as something essential. Because what she's seen again and again is that dying is not just medical. It's emotional, it's spiritual, and at times it's something more, something mysterious. She now teaches other nurses to pay close attention to the signs. When a patient suddenly begins speaking to someone who isn't there, when the room feels different, when a sense of calm washes over someone who had been struggling. These are not signs of confusion. These are signals, gentle ones, that something sacred is unfolding. Hadley often writes about how these final moments have changed her, not only as a nurse, but as a person. "What I've seen in the final minutes of others' lives," she wrote, "has helped me live my own life differently." It's not just about being prepared for death. It's about understanding life in a deeper way, about realizing how fragile, precious, and connected we really are. And she's not alone. Thousands of people have written to her. Readers, followers, patients, families, saying her stories gave them peace, that they helped them let go, that they no longer fear death the way they used to. That for the first time, they feel that maybe, just maybe, the soul doesn't die. Hadley doesn't claim to have all the answers, but she's seen enough to know this. Something happens at the end, and it's not something we should fear, it's something we should honor, and maybe something we should trust. Hadley Vlahos is a gifted hospice nurse who never looked away during the most sacred moments of a person's life. She sat beside the dying, watched them, listened to them, and truly felt what was unfolding. And in doing so, she came to a quiet but powerful realization: death is not the end. There is something beyond it, something kind, something full of light. Her courage to speak openly about what she witnessed, without exaggeration or fear, has given countless people something they didn't even know they were missing: hope. Hope that this life is not all there is. Hope that our loved ones are waiting. Hope that what comes after might be even more beautiful than we can imagine. Hadley doesn't demand belief. She doesn't offer answers wrapped in certainty. She simply shares what she saw, real stories, spoken in final breaths, filled with peace, wonder, and mystery. And when those stories repeat again and again across ages, faiths, and families, they stop feeling like coincidence. They start to feel like the truth. Do you believe in life after death? Write in the comments. Recently, some interesting videos were released on my channel. I strongly advise you to watch them. Please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. See you soon.